everyone, welcome to my channel. So today I prepared another Japanese folktale. It's called Warashibe Chouja in Japanese, and the English title is The Straw That Brought Good Fortune. So it is an interesting story, and today's picture is here. So this is the straw. Yeah. So let's get started. The Straw That Brought Good Fortune. Part 1. A quiet morning and a single straw. Long ago, in a small village surrounded by green fields and gentle hills, there lived a poor young man. He lived alone in a small house with a roof made of old straw. The house was simple. The walls were worn. The floor creaked softly when he walked across it. Yet he kept the little house clean. Every morning he swept the floor and opened the wooden window to let in the fresh air. The young man worked hard. He tried many different jobs. Sometimes he carried firewood from the forest. Sometimes he helped farmers in the rice fields. Sometimes he repaired fences or cleaned barns. But no matter how hard he worked, he never seemed to earn enough money. Each evening, he returned home tired. He would sit quietly beside a small lamp. Then he would look at the moon through his window and wonder about his future. "Why am I always poor?" he whispered one night. The moon shone softly across the village. A cool breeze moved through the grass. Far away, a dog barked. The young man sighed. "I do not need great riches," he said quietly. "I only want enough to live peacefully." Days passed, then weeks passed. Still nothing changed. One spring morning, after another difficult week, the young man decided to visit a nearby temple. The temple stood on a hill above the village. A stone path led through tall cedar trees. Their branches swayed gently in the wind. The sound was soft and calming. The young man slowly climbed the hill. Birds sang among the trees. Sunlight filtered through the leaves. The air smelled fresh and clean. When he reached the temple, he bowed deeply. The temple was quiet. Only the faint sound of a bell could be heard. The young man knelt before the altar. He closed his eyes. For a long time he remained there. Finally he spoke. "Please guide me." His voice was soft. "I work hard every day, but I do not know what path to follow." The room remained silent. Yet somehow he felt calmer. He stayed at the temple all day. As evening approached, he became sleepy. The warm sunlight and peaceful atmosphere made his eyes heavy. Soon he drifted into a gentle sleep. That night, he had a strange dream. In the dream, a kind voice spoke to him. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. It was soft, warm, and clear. "When you leave the temple tomorrow," the voice said, "take the first thing you find." The young man listened carefully. The voice repeated the words, take the first thing you find and treasure it." Then the dream faded away. The young man woke early the next morning. The sky was pale blue. A few clouds drifted slowly overhead. For a moment he wondered if the dream had been real. Then he remembered every word. He stood up and bowed once more before leaving the temple. As he walked down the stone path, he thought about the dream. What could it mean? He wondered. The path was uneven. Small stones lay scattered across the ground. As he walked, his foot caught on a rock. Ah! He stumbled. He nearly fell. When he looked down, he noticed something lying beside the path. It was a single straw. Just one small piece of straw. The young man stared at it. He almost laughed. "A straw?" he said. "This is the first thing I found." For a moment he considered leaving it behind. After all, what value could a single straw have? But then he remembered the dream. Take the first thing you find and treasure it. Slowly he picked up the straw. The golden straw felt right in his hand. He turned it over and smiled. "Very well," he said. "If this is my gift, I will take care of it." He tucked the straw carefully into his belt and continued walking. The morning sun rose higher. The village roads gradually became busier. Farmers led oxen toward the fields. Merchants pushed carts along the road. Children laughed as they ran through the grass. The young man walked peacefully. Even though he still had only a straw, he felt strangely hopeful. As he followed the road, something small buzzed near his face. Bzzz. A horsefly circled around him. It flew near his ear, then near his nose. The young man waved his hand. The fly returned again and again. The buzzing grew annoying. Bzz, Bzz, bzz. The young man laughed. You seem very determined. The fly continued flying around him. Then an idea came to him. He gently caught the fly. Carefully, he tied it to the end of the straw using a thin thread from his sleeve. The fly buzzed and danced through the air. The straw swung lightly. The strange little toy made him smile. He continued down the road. Not long afterward, he heard the sound of crying. A small child sat beside the road. The child was traveling with his mother. Tears rolled down his cheeks. The mother looked tired. She tried to comfort him, but the child continued crying. The young man approached carefully. What happened? He asked. The mother sighed. He is tired from the journey. The child rubbed his eyes. Nothing seemed able to cheer him up. Then the young man remembered the buzzing fly. He held up the straw. The fly danced in circles. Bzz, bzz. The child stopped crying. His eyes widened. He watched the fly move through the air. A smile slowly appeared on his face. The child laughed. The mother smiled with relief. Oh my, she said. He likes it. The young man handed the toy to the child. The child held it happily. His laughter echoed along the road. The mother bowed deeply. Thank you. She searched through her basket. Then she pulled out 3 bright oranges. Please accept these. The young man was surprised. Oh, that is not necessary. But the mother insisted. You brought happiness to my son. Finally, he accepted the gift. Now he no longer had a straw. Instead, he had 3 beautiful oranges. As he continued walking beneath the warm spring sun, he wondered where this strange journey might lead. And deep inside, he felt that the story of the single straw had only just begun. Part 2. 3 oranges and unexpected exchanges. The young man continued along the road. The 3 oranges rested carefully inside the cloth bag hanging from his shoulder. Their bright color stood out against the soft green of the countryside. The morning sun climbed higher into the sky. Warm light spread across the fields. The rice shoots moved gently in the breeze like waves upon a quiet sea. The young man walked slowly. He felt no need to hurry. For the first time in many months, his heart felt light. He thought about the dream at the temple. First, he had found a single straw. Then the straw became a toy. And the toy had become 3 oranges. It was not much, yet somehow it felt important. As he walked, he quietly thanked the kind voice from his dream. Around midday, the air became warmer. The road passed through a wide open field. There were very few trees nearby. The sunlight shone brightly overhead. In the distance, the young man noticed a small carriage stopped beside the road. A wealthy family appeared to be traveling. The carriage was beautiful. Its wooden panels were polished and smooth. Colorful cloth curtains hung beside the windows. Several servants stood nearby. One servant found a young lady who sat beneath a small shade. The young lady looked exhausted. Her face was pale from the heat. A servant offered her water. Another servant tried to cool her with a fan. Still, she seemed uncomfortable. The young man slowed his steps. He noticed that the young lady kept looking toward the oranges in his bag. Their fresh scent drifted gently through the warm air. The young lady swallowed. Then she quietly spoke to one of her attendants. The attendant approached the young man. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Our young mistress has become very tired from the journey. She has been wishing for something fresh to eat. Would you be willing to sell one of your oranges?" The young man looked at the oranges. He had planned to save them. Food was precious. Still, he could see that the young lady was struggling. He smiled kindly. "I do not need payment," he said. "I would be happy to share." The attendant looked surprised. He returned to the carriage and explained. Soon, the young lady herself stepped forward. She bowed slightly. "You are very kind," she said softly. The young man offered her all 3 oranges. The young lady's eyes widened. "All 3? Please take them." The young lady accepted them gratefully. The servants peeled one orange immediately. The sweet scent filled the air. The young lady took a bite. A smile appeared on her face. "Delicious," she whispered. The color slowly returned to her cheeks. The attendant looked felt relieved. One elderly servant stepped forward. He carried a folded bundle wrapped in cloth. "You have shown great kindness," he said. "Please accept this in return." The young man opened the cloth. Inside was a beautiful roll of fine silk. It was far more valuable than the oranges. His eyes widened. "Oh, I cannot accept something so valuable." But the servant shook his head. "Our mistress wishes it." The young lady smiled. "Please take it." After much hesitation, the young man bowed deeply. "Thank you." The carriage soon continued its journey. The young man stood beside the road watching it disappear. Then he looked down at the silk. The cloth shimmered softly in the sunlight. It felt smooth beneath his fingers. Just that morning, he had possessed only a single straw. Now he carried a valuable piece of silk. The change felt almost unbelievable. Yet the day was not finished. The young man continued walking. The road led through villages and small farming communities. Birds sang from rooftops. Children played near wells. Women washed clothes beside streams. Everywhere he looked, life moved peacefully forward. As afternoon turned toward evening, he reached a small village. Near the village entrance, he noticed a farmer standing beside a horse. The horse looked tired. Its head hung low. The farmer sighed heavily. He patted the horse's neck. Then he noticed the silk. "That is beautiful cloth," the farmer said. The young man smiled. "Thank you." The farmer scratched his head. "My wife has always dreamed of owning silk like that." The young man listened politely. The farmer looked embarrassed. "I know it is impossible. A poor farmer like me could never afford such fine clothes." The horse shifted its weight. The farmer sighed again. "This horse has become weak recently. I fear it may not be able to work much longer." The young man looked at the horse carefully. Although it appeared tired, it did not seem seriously ill. An idea slowly formed in his mind. "What if we exchanged them?" he asked. The farmer blinked. "Exchanged?" "The silk for your horse." The farmer stared at him. For several moments, neither spoke. Then the farmer laughed nervously. You cannot be serious. I am. The farmer looked at the silk, then at the horse, then back at the silk. His eyes grew wider. Are you certain? Yes. The farmer could hardly believe his luck. After asking several times to make sure, he finally agreed. The exchange was made. The farmer held the silk carefully. The young man took the horse's rope. As the farmer hurried home with a huge smile on his face, the young man gently stroked the horse's neck. Well, he said softly, it seems you and I are traveling together now. The horse blinked. Its ears twitched. The young man laughed quietly. The sun was beginning to set. Golden light spread across the countryside. Long shadows stretched over the fields. The young man led the horse down the road. A cool evening breeze arrived. Crickets began singing in the grass. For a while, everything felt peaceful. Then suddenly, the horse stumbled. The young man quickly grabbed the rope. The horse lowered itself onto the ground. It seemed exhausted. The young man knelt beside it. Easy now. He found a nearby stream. Using a small wooden bowl, he brought water. The horse drank slowly. Then he gathered fresh grass and placed it nearby. The horse rested quietly. The young man sat beside it. Above them, the evening sky slowly darkened. Stars appeared one by one. The moon rose above the distant hills. The young man leaned against a tree. He listened to the gentle sounds of nature. The flowing stream, the singing insect, the rustling leaves. Everything felt calm. Everything felt peaceful. He thought about the strange path his day had taken. A straw, a toy, 3 oranges, a roll of silk, and now a horse. The dream's meaning was still a mystery. But one thing was becoming clear. Each gift had arrived because he chose kindness, not greed, not selfishness, kindness. The young man smiled softly. Then he gazed at the moon shining above the trees. Tomorrow would bring another day, and perhaps another unexpected turn in his journey. The horse rested quietly beside him as the night grew deeper. Together, they waited for the sunrise. Part 3. The horse and the empty estate. The night passed quietly. The young man slept beneath the tree. The horse rested beside him. A cool breeze drifted through the leaf above. The sound of the nearby stream followed softly through the darkness. Now and then, an owl called from somewhere in the forest. The young man slept peacefully. When morning arrived, golden sunlight filtered through the branches. Birds greeted the new day with cheerful songs. The young man opened his eyes. For a moment he simply listened. The world felt calm and fresh. Dew sparkled on the grass. The air carried the sweet scent of wildflowers. He sat up and stretched. Then he looked toward the horse. The horse was already awake. It stood quietly beside the stream. Its eyes seemed brighter than they had the day before. The young man smiled. "You look stronger today." The horse flicked its tail. It lowered its head and continued eating fresh grass. After sharing a simple breakfast of rice that remained in his bag, the young man prepared to continue his journey. He gently patted the horse's neck. "Shall we go?" The horse snorted softly. Together they returned to the road. The morning passed peacefully. The countryside slowly changed around them. The small villages became fewer. Wide fields stretched towards the horizon. Mountains stood in the distance beneath a clear blue sky. A horse walked steadily. With each passing hour, it seemed healthier. Its steps became stronger. Its coat shone in the sunlight. The young man felt grateful. As noon approached, they reached a large road used by travelers and merchants. Many people passed by. Some rode horses. Some pushed carts. Others carried goods on their backs. The young man noticed a group of travelers gathered ahead. They stood beside an elegant carriage. Several servants moved about in a hurry. Their faces showed concern. A wealthy gentleman packed back and forth. He appeared troubled. The young man approached slowly. One servant noticed the horse. His eyes widened. He hurried toward the gentleman. The gentleman turned and looked. Then his face brightened immediately. "That horse!" he exclaimed. The young man stopped. The gentleman walked closer. "Young man, where did you find such a fine horse?" The young man looked surprised. I exchanged a roll of silk for it. The gentleman studied the animal carefully. It is beautiful. One servant stepped forward. Our master's horse became ill this morning, he explained. We must travel a great distance, but we cannot continue without our horse. The gentleman nodded. We are in a difficult situation. He looked at the young man kindly. Would you consider selling your horse? The young man glanced at his companion. The horse stood calmly beside him. He had grown fond of it. Still, he remembered how every step of his strange journey had led him somewhere new. What would you offer? He asked. The gentleman thought for a moment. Then he pointed towards a rolled document carried by one of his servants. I own a small estate nearby. The servant carefully unrolled the paper. It showed land, buildings, and fields. I have not used it in years, the gentleman explained. It has been sitting empty. The young man's eyes widened. An estate, even a small one, was worth far more than a horse. The gentleman smiled. I would gladly exchange the estate for your horse. The young man could hardly believe what he was hearing. The offer seemed impossible. Yet the gentleman appeared sincere. After discussing the details, they completed the exchange. The official documents were handed over. The gentleman received the horse. The young man received ownership of the estate. As the wealthy travelers continued on their journey, the young man stood quietly holding the papers. A gentle breeze moved across the road. He stared at the documents. Only a few days earlier, he had owned almost nothing. Now he possessed land, buildings, fields, an entire estate. The dream at the temple felt more mysterious than ever. But there was still one problem. He had never seen the estate. He did not know its condition. Perhaps it was ruined. Perhaps the buildings had collapsed. Perhaps the fields were barren. The young man decided to find out. Following the directions written on the document, he began walking. The road curved through forest and hills. Hours passed. The afternoon sun drifted lower in the sky. At last he reached a narrow path lined with old pine trees. At the end of the path stood a large wooden gate. The gate leaned slightly with age. Vines climbed along the post. Beyond it stood several buildings. The estate appeared quiet, very quiet. The young man pushed the gate open. It creaked softly. Slowly he entered. Grass covered much of the ground. Wild flowers grew freely. A pond reflected the sky like a mirror. Dragonflies drifted above the water. The buildings showed signs of age. Yet they remained standing. The roofs were well slid. The walls needed repair, but the estate was far from ruined. The young man walked through the property in amazement. There were storage buildings, workshops, fields, fruit trees, even a large house. Everything had simply been left untouched for many years. As evening approached, he entered the main house. Dust covered some surfaces, yet the structure felt warm and welcoming. Sunlight streamed through paper windows. Golden beams crossed the wooden floor. The young man sat quietly in the center of the room. For a long time he said nothing. The silence felt peaceful. He remembered the difficult days in his tiny cottage. The evenings when he worried about tomorrow. The nights when he wondered whether life would ever improve. Now he sat inside a house larger than anything he had ever imagined. Yet strangely, he did not feel proud. He did not feel greedy. Instead, he felt grateful. Very grateful. As darkness settled outside, he lit a small lantern. Its warm glow filled the room. Crickets sang beyond the windows. The scent of pine drifted through the evening air. The young man smiled softly. Then he whispered, "Thank you." He was not sure whether he was speaking to the temple, the dream, the kind voice, or perhaps simply to life itself. The lantern flickered gently. Outside, the stars appeared one by one. The estate seemed to breathe peacefully beneath the moonlight. The young man did not know it yet, but the greatest gift all of was still waiting for him, and it would arrive sooner than he expected. Part 4. The True Fortune of the Straw Millionaire. The young man spent his first night in the empty estate listening to the quiet sounds of nature. The moon shone through the paper windows. gentle breeze moved through the garden. Somewhere near the pond, frogs sang softly. The peaceful sounds filled the darkness. The young man lay on a simple mat. For a long time he could not sleep. Not because he was worried, not because he was afraid, but because everything felt so strange. Only a short time ago, he had owned nothing but a single straw. Now, he rested inside a large estate surrounded by fields and gardens. The journey felt like a dream. Eventually, his eyes grew heavy. The sounds of the night became softer and softer. Soon he drifted into sleep. When morning arrived, sunlight filled the room. The young man stepped outside. Fresh dew sparkled on the grass. The air smelled clean and sweet. Birds flew among the trees. The pond reflected the bright blue sky. For a while, he simply walked through the estate. Every corner revealed something new. There were fruit trees covered with young leaves. There were vegetable gardens that could easily be restored. There were storehouses filled with old tools. The estate had been neglected, but it still held great promise. The young man smiled. "I will take care of this place." He rolled up his sleeves and began working. Day after day, he repaired fences. He cleared weeds. He cleaned buildings. He planted crops. The work was difficult, but he enjoyed every moment. The land slowly came back to life. As the weeks passed, travelers occasionally stopped by. Some asked for water. Others asked for directions. The young man welcomed everyone kindly. He shared what he could. He never forgot the difficult years of his own life. One warm afternoon, several travelers arrived at the gate. They appeared tired. Dust covered their clothing. The young man greeted them warmly. "Welcome." The travelers bowed. "Thank you for allowing us to rest." The young man prepared tea. He offered food from his garden. The travelers smiled with relief. One elderly traveler looked around the estate. "It is beautiful here," he said. The young man laughed softly. "It still needs much work." The old traveler shook his head. "A place becomes beautiful because of the heart of the person who cares for it." The young man felt slightly embarrassed. He thanked the traveler for the kind words. As evening approached, travelers prepared to leave. One member of the group lingered behind. It was a young woman. She had been quiet during most of the visit. Her gentle eyes wandered across the garden. The flowers swayed softly in the evening breeze. The pond shimmered beneath the setting sun. Finally, she spoke. "This place feels peaceful." The young man smiled. "I think so too." For a moment, neither said anything. The sound of cicadas drifted through the warm air. The young woman smiled. Then she followed the others and left. The young man watched them disappear down the road. For some reason, he found himself thinking about her long after they had gone. The seasons continued to change. Summer arrived. The fields turned bright green. The crops grew strong. Then autumn came. Golden rice swayed in the breeze. Persimmons ripened on the trees. The mountains glowed with red and orange leaves. The estate flourished. The young man worked hard every day. Yet he never became greedy. Whenever someone needed help, he offered it gladly. Whenever travelers visited, he welcomed them. Whenever neighbors faced difficulties, he shared what he had. His kindness became known throughout the region. People respected him, not because he was wealthy, but because he remained humble. One autumn afternoon, a familiar group of travelers returned. The young man immediately recognized them, and among them was the young woman he remembered. She smiled when he saw him. The young man's heart felt unexpectedly warm. The travelers stayed for several days. During that time, the young man and the young woman spoke often. They walked through the gardens. They watched dragonflies above the pond. They listened to the evening insects sing beneath the stars. Their conversations were simple. Yet each day, they enjoyed each other's company more. One evening, they sat beneath a large maple tree. Red leaves drifted gently through the air. The setting sun painted the sky with gold and pink colors. The young woman looked towards the fields. "You have built something wonderful here." The young man shook his head. "The land was already here, but you cared for it." He smiled. "Perhaps." The young woman smiled too. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she quietly said, "I am glad I returned." The young man looked at her. So am I." The wind moved softly through the leaves above them. Far away, a bird called. The peaceful moment stayed in their hearts. Not long afterward, the young man asked for her hand in marriage. She happily accepted. Their wedding was simple and joyful. Friends and neighbors gathered. Laughter filled the estate. Music drifted through the gardens. Lanterns glowed warmly beneath the evening sky. The young man looked around at everyone who had come. His heart felt full, not because of his land, not because of his success, but because he was surrounded by kindness. Years passed. The estate prospered. The couple raised a family. Children's laughter echoed through the gardens. The fields produced abundant harvest. The ponds reflected countless sunsets. Travelers continued to visit, and every guest was welcomed warmly. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, the young man would sit beside the pond and think about the strange path that had changed his life. A single straw, a buzzing fly, 3 oranges, a roll of silk, a horse, an estate. Each step had seemed small at the time. Each exchange had appeared ordinary. Yet together they had led him somewhere remarkable. Still, as he grew older, he came to understand something important. The straw itself had never been magical. The true fortune had come from the choices he made. If he had ignored the child, the story would have ended. If he acted selfishly, the path would have ended. If he had valued possessions more than kindness, everything would have been different. The young man smiled as he watched the moon reflected in the pond. At last he understood the lesson. Good fortune often begins with something very small. A simple gift, a simple kindness, a simple decision. Just like a single straw lying beside a quiet road. And so the young man who had once been poor became known throughout the land as the straw millionaire. Not because he had gained wealth, but because he had gained wisdom, friendship, gratitude, and love. And one peaceful night, when the wind moved gently through the fields and the stars shone above the sleeping estate, people would tell his story. They would speak of the humble young man, the single straw, and the kindness that changed everything. And their voices would drift softly through the night air, carrying the tale from one generation to the next. So, story is finished. It is interesting story, isn't it? So thank you for watching. Good night.